Welcome again to Natural 2. It's our weekly D&D and tabletop role-playing talk show. And this week we're going to talk about ambushes. Surprise!
Ambushes and or having the party on the back foot kind of also somewhat falls in this category in a bit more of a broader spectrum. I find it interesting to see the party in that dynamic, especially more like the players and how they react and how to keep that engaging, because some people are not good at handling it not being in control of a situation.
So, I'm James, he's Nathan, and the background here for this topic is it's inspired by our most recent session, which by the time this goes up, you can see a recording of on this channel. But in it, the party was ambushed. For real, like in the truest sense of the word. The party was separated. If you want to know how, you'll have to watch the video. No spoilers. um, it's not. You'll never guess. The party was separated. The watch was not watching, and then monsters set upon the camp while we were still engaged in our long rest.
Yeah, you were all literally asleep as they attacked, which I think is the first that has ever happened to me being on the DM side of the table. Usually it's either like, oh, the one person on watch sees them or something of that sort. There's some sort of warning. So that was interesting to play around with. There's also potentially maybe a little bit of a side topic of running two battle maps at the same time, which was interesting. I wanted to actually throw you a question first because this came up after our session concluded. You asked me if that was, I guess, like what was planned or how it was supposed to go, or if that was like the process of events that I was kind of looking to play out. And I was curious why you asked that. Was that from the curiosity of like, oh, is this like Nathan's grand scheme of trying to like get us to learn a lesson or get beat up or potentially lose this combat? Like, what, I guess, was the source of that?
So the way that the watch was distracted, you put down some bait
Mm-hmm.
for specifically that member of the party,
Mm-hmm.
and I think he's the only member of the party that would have taken that bait.
Yeah.
Uh, so it was for him specifically. Like it couldn't have gone better if it had been engineered to go that way. And by better, I mean
Worse
worse.
for the party, yeah.
Worse for us. Yeah, being on the wrong end of a surprise round. So I think that was the biggest thing, was that it was, the situation was just tailor made for this particular character to screw up.
Mm-hmm. The I think the broader concept around this that I find interesting, that I try and wrestle with because I'm always analyzing our game to far too much of an extent in my free time. When you're the DM, you're in charge of running all the enemies, right? And this kind of lures you towards the trap of being an adversarial DM. And I kind of hate being effective. I hate running effective enemies. I hate running enemies that think more than just charge straight ahead and die in very large numbers, because then it feels like I'm trying to get one over on you guys. I'm trying to impede on your fun or try and like needle at some weakness or some knowledge that I know that you don't. And that was a little bit of the flavor I was getting during the session. I liked the session, to kind of put that out there. I think it was very interesting and there's a lot that's going to come off of it. But I specifically was laying out traps for a variety of the party. The force that you were fighting against was attempting to separate not you guys specifically, but any sort of caravan or party or group that they were setting upon. So this was their way of handling it, and one of you just stumbled into one of the traps, basically. And so that's kind of the issue on like behind the screen that I have is like the party sees, oh, there is this one specific trap that the DM laid out, and of course we stepped in it because he has all the strings and whatnot, but realistically there was 5 or 6 different ways that this kind of same scenario could have played out with different characters, and we just didn't go that route. And so it feels so strange to me at the end of the session when like I have to come to terms with the party thinking that I tried to like steer them in a direction when I didn't, if that makes sense. And it makes me kind of standoffish about engaging in that stuff because I don't ever want any of the players to feel like I'm trying to force them into a situation or railroad them, because there's a lot of pretty negative energy around that term or that activity. But yeah, so that's more or less why I asked, is I was curious if you were getting that feeling, and if so, how to potentially fix that.
I don't think there's anything to fix.
Mhm.
It's meta of me to even ask. I just, again, it it went so perfectly wrong.
Mhm.
Like, I think since I've joined the group, this is the biggest butt kicking that the party has had in either this campaign or the previous campaign. Um,
Yeah, maybe the tomb is like where you the second contract that went pretty wrong in Laura Tales. That might be about the same.
none of us went down
Yeah,
though.
yeah.
In this one, half of the party was down, and if the circumstances had been even a little different,
Hmm.
um, half the party would be dead,
Hmm.
or all but one of the party would be dead.
Hmm.
Um, so in a we came the closest we ever have to a TPK.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm not mad about it because I'm just happy that it isn't yet a TPK. We, you know, 3/4 of us apparently have survived.
Hmm.
There remains to be seen about the fourth, but uh, we're gonna live to get our revenge. Knock on wood. But
Hmm.
uh, again, it was just like, wow, this was a this we just put a target on our backs for these bad guys.
Hmm. I think the difference between setting up something like that, like an ambush, where you all are just like kind of suddenly thrust into this. One of our other players, Rob, described it to me pretty well. He said it felt like a cutscene in a video game where you walk into the zone, like the trigger zone, and then all of a sudden you're in that cutscene leading into you being captured, and there's nothing that you, the player, can do about it because you're just watching this cutscene play out. And that was kind of what sparked me thinking about this a bit deeper than just kind of like, I don't know, disregarding it. Is I don't want that to be the feeling, because it very much, I could see why he got that perception. You guys were asleep, everything was going fine, and then in a matter of minutes, it looks like you all are about to die pretty quickly. And through a lot of dedicated effort across the party, you all lived, but I think that's why we don't see a lot of this used all that often, is I feel like it's really difficult to pull off without it feeling like the DM is coming across as like forcing this one way. Because I'm sure if I looked it up or even just did a passing glance, there are plenty of horror stories of, oh, we were traveling and then we were set upon by 7,000 goblins that we couldn't possibly beat, and then we were kidnapped and brought to this really intricate dungeon that the DM wanted to show off. And it's like, all right, at that point, it's pretty cut and dry, like what the intentions are of all the, I guess, decision making going on there. The I'm curious what the difference is, or I think I know what the difference is, but I like to put it out there. If I had had the same encounter, but just bulked up the goblins' HP damage wise or whatever other means I have, so that it was about the same outcome of all the ally NPCs dying and you guys almost going down, and you like kind of gripping the jaws of victory from defeat. Yeah, that's not how you said it, but anyway, you know what I'm saying. Um, if it was a more
Snatching snatching a
Yeah.
a slightly less bad defeat from the jaws of a worse
Yeah.
defeat.
But if it was like a straight up combat, but ended in the same result, but you guys felt like you started on equal footing without the ambush, I feel like you all would have felt better about that versus what happened, where they ambushed you, and clearly, if it was a straight up conflict, like if you guys were in a open plane with the exact same stats, you would have murdered them. You would have wiped the floor with them. But the fact that they had that advantage is the only reason they had a chance. So I'm curious to poke or dive further into that rabbit hole of like how could you potentially shift the kind of negative foundation you're building by ambushing the party, because I feel like all players are going to react to that in a somewhat negative manner, but that could just be me superimposing my thoughts on them.
Well, we'll have a callback here to something I know has come up in past episodes, at least one, if not several, and that is that um, in general you hold the narrative piece above the game piece.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in the scales of your brain. And I like to think that I hold them pretty equally personally.
Mm-hmm.
And so having said that, when you are when you are losing your game, it's never gonna feel good. Like most people, except maybe Seth, are never gonna be like tickled by that. It's
Yeah.
all, even if you're enjoying it, and even if you look back on it, like I currently do, our last session of like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, that was crazy, and next session is gonna be really interesting now, and all that stuff. It's still a part of the fun, but in that moment, there are gonna be some uh negative, for lack of a better word, negative vibes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't think that in and of itself should scare anybody off of doing anything in their campaign,
Mm-hmm.
because it feels good to steamroll a bunch of bad guys. It also feels really good to lose and then plot your revenge and come
Mm-hmm.
back and pay them back.
Well,
That's
yeah,
that's
you were already doing that at the end of our session of like we're about to plan out this brutal murder on these guys. So.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. We're gonna get them. We're gonna get our own back. So both of these things are good
Mm-hmm.
in my mind. So don't be scared of letting, not even letting. Don't be scared of having challenges in your game.
Well, is that the answer, that ambushes against the party or, kind of negative scenarios like that aren't ever going to be fun in the traditional sense of everyone's laughing and kind of jolly and, joking around, but having them is necessary for the overall enjoyment of the game is kind of the rough
Oh,
conclusion?
things got serious.
Mm-hmm.
We as a party got serious, and we're trying to think of like, what are we gonna do? If you look back at, I went down early in the fight, so there
Mm-hmm.
wasn't a lot for me to think about. But JC, who plays Braynoon, was working hard uh, to salvage the situation, and so
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like seeing that member of the team pull a clutch maneuver to keep hope alive. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's exciting. That's good. And the situation that created that is good as a result.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's really the bottom line, I think, of what I'm trying to say at the moment is don't um what you, Nathan, or you, the audience, if don't let it get to you. Don't let it get under your skin, because in those tense moments, there's going to be a variety of reactions.
Mm-hmm.
The emotional investment is high if things are going well. Like, in my mind, it would be worse if the reaction were more neutral,
Mm-hmm.
because that shows that there's less investment.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll start with that. Uh, I also want to take a moment to define what we mean by ambush in pretty specific terms here, because we're not just talking about any random encounter. An ambush specifically would be a situation where the party, for whatever reason, is on the back foot. They are getting a surprise round against them. The bad guys are in an advantageous
Position.
position, or an advantageous priority of
Terrain.
their
Yeah.
action.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's also it matters. Here's a sidebar. Here's a little pro tip. When it comes to balancing your campaign, the number one issue, more than half of balance, is the action economy. More than levels, more than CR, more than anything else, it's the action economy. And part of that economy is who has priority. That first turn of combat is the most important turn.
Mm-hmm.
And if the goblins who ambushed us had whiffed all their hits on their surprise round, then also maybe we would have been victorious.
Mm-hmm.
But they had some mean hits on that surprise round, and then they followed it up with some more mean hits on the first actual turn.
Mm-hmm.
So that more than anything else, I think their ability to just start the combat right in our faces and basically get 2 full turns before we had a chance to act is what, it was over before it started.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are trying to balance an encounter, if you're wondering whether an ambush, if you're trying to gauge the difference between putting some fear into the party and erasing the party and starting a new one, it's how much that group is going to get to do before the
Mm-hmm.
party has a chance to react.
So we're kind of drifting away from our main topic, but I am really curious about this, and I enjoy discussing shit with you, James. So I'm gonna poke you a little bit, and I'm also probably revealing a little bit more of my hand than I usually like to, but I'm very curious what your review or rating of this is. The encounter that we just went through was very much me attempting to test the concept of, in our game, to describe very briefly, they are an adventuring guild that can select contracts kind of based on difficulty ranking. And so there's like a bronze contract and a steel contract and so on and so forth. So the contract they took should reasonably be within their means. That's kind of the general consensus that they understand. And I wanted to take again a group or a threat or a problem that you all would have handled very easily in an upfront encounter and make it so they only fought in a position where they only took the offensive in a position where they had the advantage. Because that's more or less how goblins or bandits or any sort of kind of miscreants would act. They would not go charging headlong into a negative situation. They want to live. And so this was my attempt to try and take a weaker enemy that you would have just decimated otherwise, and again, not railroad you all, but build up the proper tactics and infrastructure and hints or whatever kind of term you want to use there so that it actually felt fair and justified and developed, and then spring it if it works and leave it if it didn't. That was kind of the interesting part of it as far as me watching in the background is the ambush was never 100% confirmed or dedicated to happen. You all very much could have stuck together, kept your watches up, and they never would have attacked because they never could have found that opening that they needed. And so I'm curious if you think that played out well, now having played through it as the player, or if you think there were bits and bobs that could have been improved. I think the main thing I wanted to achieve was getting that concept across and also making it feel fair. And then fair is kind of a loose term in this thing. But yeah, that's my general, I guess, question to you.
Reasonable, let's
Yeah,
say.
yeah.
It's a reasonable to, the things that happened in a
Mm-hmm.
reasonable way. And yeah, I think that's true. I don't have any qualms. I don't have any out of character qualms about how it played out.
Hmm.
In character, somebody's going to get backhanded,
Yeah.
but out of character, no.
Hmm.
I think it was well executed in that way, and I think it also is revealing a pattern for our party. But that's a discussion that's specific to the campaign.
Hmm.
So that bringing us back onto our main topic, like that's a really good point. An ambush is a way to feature some lower level bad guys or some less capable of, in terms of their stats, less capable uh monsters,
Hmm.
and make them a threat. Because you're right. If we could have started this in any other way, then we would have sewn them up. But they were uh canny.
Hmm. The I know that alluding to our campaign kind of has its pros and cons because people familiar with it can help, but people that aren't kind of are lost. But the really cool two examples that are really relevant and recent is you guys handling the kobolds and you guys handling the goblins, where the kobolds, you took them by surprise, you were on your position, you were in like the controlling aspect of that scenario, where otherwise it might have played out pretty similar to what we just went through, where in the goblins, they were in that position and they were dictating the flow of combat and what was going on. And you can very much see the difference of those two interactions where they were probably about the same challenge level, but you as a party approached it or were approached by it in different ways. And I like that because so often in D&D, when you get like fixated on balancing encounters, you forget that things like to live and that they're living, breathing, thinking sometimes like creatures where they don't just stand there and wait to get killed, or they're not just lolling around and waiting for the heroes to show up and bash their brains in. Like, they should have some sort of self-preservation in mind. And so that's what I really enjoyed about our last campaign, our last session, where they acted like you would think they would act, or as you would hear goblins act when they're not interacting with the party. Like, oh, did you hear about the caravan that was ambushed last week? Yes, I heard it was a slaughter. They left the dead across the road. And you're like, oh, that would never happen to us. Well, yeah. So I think that's a cool thing, but wrapping everything back around to actually being somewhat on topic, because I'm awful about this shit. I think the one thing you have to stay true to is being fair, and there's probably a pretty lengthy conversation to have in that regard because you probably let your party cheat or bend the rules a bit more than you're allowed to. Um, but you need to make sure that you do your due diligence of making the situation plausible. It was a little bit easy in our situation because the watch was literally not there, so the goblins could just stroll on up. But you can't have someone who is actively keeping an eye out and has all these alarm strings and bells set up and just have something appear right in front of them or drop down on top of them. So that's something that I think is a staple or necessary for this to take place. Otherwise, your party's probably going to mutiny.
Yeah, this uh whether it's reasonable that this would happen again, more so than being fair,
Mm.
because fair is a pretty loaded term. Like, there's a lot of baggage with the
Yeah.
word fair.
I guess
But
earning it is a better term.
yeah, that's a good word too, because there's a good chance that this will be the only ambush on our party for a pretty long time, because after this, we're going to be stringing those bells and
Mhm.
doubling the watch and whatever else we have to do. Uh, and so a good DM should take those kinds of things into account. Don't force an ambush to be an ambush if the party is taking obvious and thorough steps to prevent an ambush. That's
Mhm.
specifically what they're trying not to do. So that that is a big piece. That's an important piece to make the difference between feeling bad in a good way and feeling bad in a bad way.
Hmm. I think it's a lot of the same energy of DMs that will get online and complain about, like, oh, my party bought like a 10-foot pole and a sense trap and pressure boots, and every single quarter they move down, they tap the stick and they check every tile and they detect magic, and like, I can't get a trap, I can never use a trap, and it's like, there it is. Like, that's the purpose of the trap, is to make them wary. So now that they're wary, your trap is fulfilling its purpose, it's just not doing the damage. So I think the ambush is kind of in that same category of, if your party puts up a dedicated watch and has a system in place and takes it very seriously, you've done the task of the ambush. You've now put your party on the aware, which is the whole purpose. So yeah, I think you just have to tweak what you think success is, or what you're trying to achieve, I suppose.
And I think that's a really good point to end on, because it's not something that I think about a lot when I have run games, and probably need to do a better job of keeping in mind, is like, as DM, if you start a boulder rolling down the hill, let it go wherever it's going to go.
Mm-hmm.
What I mean by that is, when I say don't try to force an ambush, I mean don't force an ambush to succeed against overwhelming measures.
Mm-hmm.
Allow an ambush to fail, because it's very much like a trap that you found. An ambush that fails against the preparations that the party made is gratifying. That is rewarding as the party, because the things that you did worked. They served a purpose,
Mm-hmm.
And let whoever took the time stringing up those bells say, "See, this is why I do that. You made fun of me, but now we're all still alive because of my bells."
Yeah, I do want to make the quick clarification that, like, finding or discovering an ambush doesn't mean that they see the goblins approaching from 3 miles away and they have time to prepare. It could just be that they've hit the perimeter of whatever spell or alarm they've put out, and now they just don't get the surprise round. But they're still set upon by goblins. The combat still happens. It's just that little edge they would have had, they no longer do, which I think is enough to make the wary player feel gratified in what they did, and also you have the situation that you've built up, so you're not wasting a bunch of time or energy or prep. It's just kind of going with the flow or paying homage to whatever preparations have been made.
Sometimes it might even be more effective for the party to imagine how badly things could have gone. The TPK that just exists in their minds
Mm-hmm.
is uh probably as good
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of ways.
Well, I was so afraid in our last session when it looked real bad, and one of the characters, the last kind of surviving member of the party, was looking like he was gonna bolt for his life. I was like, I don't know how to not make this horrible. Because if he just runs, everyone's kind of dead, and I don't know how to work around that. A little fun idea that I had, which will never come to fruition, so I feel free to sharing it, is it would have been funny if this was all like a nightmare or some sort of divine presence that Thomas had seen, and you all wake up and it's like, oh, we could have, been set upon by goblins and get murdered. It would have been a little cheap, but it could have been kind of funny. But anyway, so.
There's, like so many things, there would have been a way to earn that, uh, but that would have had to have happened a couple of sessions ago, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
But I have a question for you in the audience,
Oh.
and you're going to answer it in the comments. You're going to answer it in the comments. That is your
Make
assignment.
roll an intimidation check.
So the thing that happened to my character is that he was put down by non-lethal damage. And I haven't looked this up. I'm coming at this cold because it's a pretty uncommon scenario. But he was knocked out by non-lethal damage. How does that work, or how do you think it should work for a player character to be on the receiving end of that? Because it didn't your call as the DM was that I basically wasn't rolling death saves. I was just rolling to see if I could get a 20 or 3 successes or whatever. So there was no risk of character death, but everything else about the situation is the same. I'm still laying there like trying to wake up. So how would you handle it, viewer, or how have you handled it at your table if a player is knocked out, incapacitated by non-lethal damage?
That's a fun question, and honestly, considering that kind of came up impromptu in our game, I'm pretty impressed with the answer we came up with. I really like the idea of that, because it leaves, like, that chance of you being like, and, like, that one little tiny hope of, like, getting back up and potentially doing something without being worried about dying. It also allows your allies to not worry about you dying, as they are also trying to save everyone's lives, so...
If there's an official set of rules that handles that, then do let us know where that is, but also give us a break. There's there's a lot of rules, and it's hard to remember them all.
I would never give anyone flack for coming up with again, like an impromptu ruling in the middle of something like that. Like, if it works and it plays out well and everyone's okay with it, like if you all have this little silent handshake amongst the DM and the players, then rules as written really doesn't matter. Yeah, you can always correct it, do better next time, but yeah, I would never, ever be like, oh, well, don't you know, you're so stupid for not remembering that non-lethal damage still counts, and what if they had head trauma? You never know, his neck wasn't elevated. It's like, oh my god. So.
And if you're wondering, it was not a fudge, at least as far as I know. It was not a fudge on Nathan's part. There was an in-universe reason why the bad guys were dealing non-lethal damage to my character. And if you want to find out what it was, go watch that episode of Talora Tales.
Yep.
And like and subscribe this and that.
There you go. Double plug.
Please, thank you.
But I think that's all I got for it, sir. I think that was a fairly fun conversation. I always love picking your brain.
Same here. And we want you, dear viewer, to get in on the picking. So, no kidding. Down there.
You always address them as dear viewer, and it always has such a, like, warm kind of, like, southern hospitality feeling to me. It makes me, like, want to sit on the porch like sweet tea.
I'm going for that.
Dear viewer, why don't you come sit a while? Relax.
Stay a while and listen. So until next week.
Have a good one.